In this video, we are going to talk about attitude and philosophy and how it affects our approach in terms of the Tellington method. So we have to first think about the goals of T-Touch, and a huge goal is to deepen the relationship and foster clear communication between people and animals, and between people and people. We want to be able to treat animals and their people with equal respect and understanding. We want to influence positive behavioral change and promote well-being through the reduction of stress. And those can be really attained in part by our attitude and the philosophy that we have with the work. So here are some basic premises that we have with it. So from the Feldenkrais work, which is where Linda really got this idea of how we could influence animals in one session in many cases. Moshe Feldenkrais made a statement that the body can learn in one lesson if it does not feel threatened by pain, fear, or fear of pain or excessive stress. And when Linda heard that, she thought, wow, if that is true for people, then perhaps it is true for animals. And in the first case, it was for horses as well. And that certainly is what we've noticed. Intention is very important. Linda talks about place your heart in your hands and your hand on your animal. So for people who are really work from a place of kind of intuitive knowledge, that's really great. And if you're not and you don't feel good with your hands or very like it's a natural thing, you still learn the techniques that can make a huge difference because you'll start to pay attention, watch things in different ways, and see the results. So Linda, for years, has been talking about a statement that Charles Sherrington made, and he wrote, really, is every cell in the body knows its function within the body and its function within the universe. And for her, that was something that when she works on a person or on an animal, she's talked for years about this concept that when she thinks about as she's doing T-Touch, that it lights up the cells, which helps to remind the body of its own function and the ideal function that it can be for the most perfection that we can have. We talk about certain, we have different kind of ways to talk about things, and one of them is people often talk about desensitization, and we prefer to talk about familiarization or acceptance. And we want animals to be familiar with and accept things rather than really being desensitized. And I know it's a matter of semantics, but it does kind of change many people's perception in terms of what they're doing. Putting up with something is really different than being comfortable and accepting it. We also want to help animals be able to make better choices. And we often talked about for years of we want them to be able to act instead of react. And when humans can do so as well, it can really help an animal, whether it's a dog or if it's a horse. But, you know, we react just as much as they do. We just may have different motivations behind it. Now, lots is talked about with stress in animals and keeping stress low. And we like to think about that what we do is about low stress handling and low stress work with animals. And a certain amount of stress is required in order for something to change or for us to learn. But if there's too much stress, that's when it blocks learning. And the challenge, of course, is to know what is too much stress or what's okay amount of stress for you or for me or for your dog or whatever animal that you're working with. And so if we can do things in small amounts, that can go a long way to help that learning take place without excessive stress. So attitude is everything. And a great, I'm not even sure who came up with this, but this idea, change your mind, change your animal. And that's a really important concept to remember. We're so quick to put labels on things, whether it's people or if it's an animal. And of course, once we put a label on, it can be quite difficult to get it off. And so it kind of colors everything in terms of what we do with them. So, you know, we say, oh, they're naughty. Well, they might be acting from our perspective naughty, but for the most part, animals find ways to cope with their environment. And if it didn't work at some level, then they would probably do something else. So if we can really just change how we see it, so we can make the impossible possible, that is very, very helpful when we're working with our animals. And of course, sometimes you'll be around a group of people that have an attitude that, you know, the dog is dominant, or there's some attitude that's happening. And if you really think about it and you know, say to yourself, does that actually really make sense for you in the situation? Or may there be something else going on? That can be very helpful for you. So another saying that we have is change the posture, change the behavior. And if we think about that, if you think about a dog, for instance, who may be reactive to things, what you might notice is that the head is high, the back is tight, and maybe the tail posture is upright or is quite tense in some way. And if we can change that, and we can change it through movement, we can change it through touch, we can change it through changing the situation, we can make a huge difference in how the behavior is perceived and how they react to things. The same is true for if you think of a very shy or withdrawn animal, the head may be down, the tail tucked. And what we find is that if we can introduce a kind of positive way of making contact that really listens to the animal, that can make a big difference in terms of their response to things. Now, we then take it into movement, which is incredibly important for having permanent change and offering an option in terms of doing things in a different way for the animal. Oops, let's go this way. So altering posture can alter the feelings of yourself. And if you think about that, if you get up and you're not feeling well, you may have a posture that is kind of closed off and so on. And people may say, oh, you know, how are you feeling? Or are things not going well for you? Now, that posture can be related to pain, and it often can be expressed in the facial expression or, you know, just simply a body posture. And the posture affects emotions, and it affects the ability to cope and respond. If we're standing in a way that is physically balanced, we're going to feel safer because it means that we could move and respond to certain situations. So changing the posture can also help change the coping skills. So another saying that we have is chunk it down. And really what that means is, and one of our kind of ethoses is that in order to be a good Tellington method exercise, you can make it into smaller pieces. So if one thing isn't working, for example, in the movement exercises we do, if we use some elements and it's a little difficult for the animal, a labyrinth is a bit narrow, we could make it wider. If the surfaces are too difficult, we could take some out. So we can make it into really small pieces. Say they're not comfortable with having their feet touched. Well, we wouldn't start with the feet. We would start somewhere else. So we want to build the confidence, and we want to make it into small pieces. And this is really about us. We're supposed to be the smart ones, and this is what kind of gives us that ability to be able to use our kind of common sense and our thought process to see how can I make it more comfortable or in a smaller piece for the animal. So habits are really interesting. And I often ask people, you know, in a group, how many of you have a habit that you'd like to change? And often people put up their hand. And the bigger question is, how many of you have a habit that someone else wants you to change? And that's really what we're doing with our dogs, is their behavior at some level must work. And what we want them to do is change what they're doing. And so we have to kind of consider that, you know, how can we get them to do that? So if we use the work to bring awareness to parts of the body that they're used unthinkingly, that's one way that we can change it. Because in order to change a habit, we have to do something in a different way. We don't have to think about habits. And that's partly why we do them so easily, because it's non-thinking. It allows us to go through our day more easily. And so when we add some of these new concepts, we're actually putting new information into the brain. We're asking the body to be used in a different way. We're asking ourselves to do something in a different way, which in itself can be quite challenging. So if they come to us exhibiting a certain behavior, we can offer non-habitual change. So we might move them in a slightly different way, but do it in a way that's gentle. If they're doing things as a habit, we find that they can often change if we can offer them the possibility of another habit. We have to vary the experiences, and the nervous system will make a choice. And of course, it's why it's so tiring. It's really quite exhausting for people and animals when we have to do something in a different way, rather than when we can do something without really having to think about it. And this is where the nervous system comes in. It needs time to process. So it's actually in the pause or the space between things that we're doing that allows us to integrate the information. We want to listen to small things because too much input is very, very tiring. So you can do just a little bit of unfamiliar or unusual movement with an animal, whether it's on the body or through movement or a body wrap, and it can be actually very, very tiring. Now, it's possible to profoundly influence the behavior by working with the body. Now, an example of that might be if you're working with an animal that has extremely tight ears. You might notice that the space between the ears is kind of wrinkled and there's a lot of tension around the ears. If we can gently move that ear in a comfortable way, but in a slightly different posture, it often helps to release the tension, and you'll find that there can be very, very different behavior. For instance, if the tail is really tight and tucked, and you can gently and kind of carefully get into that area of showing the possibility of releasing the tension in the tail in just a small amount, you might be very surprised to see the difference. So we know that habits are not thinking. That's why they're so easy for us to do. And new learning for any of us is kind of fragile. If we want to maintain a new habit, we have to be careful that we're not being overstressed or put under situations that might have as default to what that previous behavior is. And that can happen really easily if you've been doing really well, and smoking is an example. Somebody's quit smoking, things are going really well for them, and suddenly something happens in their life and they feel like they're really under stress. So they may revert. They may not even think about it, but they might pick up a cigarette. So we want to try to keep animals in a space that they can maintain and develop this new habit that make it easier for them. This last one, observe what you see, not the consequences of what you believe. It goes along a little bit with that change your mind, change your animal, because we can sometimes see what we've always seen rather than actually looking for the new ways that we're seeing things or new possibilities. So I like to say to people that if the dog has had a particular behavior and suddenly they're doing something else, rather than saying, oh, but they always do such and such, I might ask people to preface it with, in the past, my dog would have done such and such. And it helps our nervous system go beyond that present tense of putting the behavior into the present tense. Change. Yes. Changing the context can change the experience and offer another possibility of a different way of being. So what does that mean? As an example, if we are walking our dog on the dog's right side, which may be your habitual side, if you walk from the left side, that will give a different context. If we put a body wrap on a dog, and maybe we just move them through the elements with the body wrap, that is going to change the context and the experience of the lesson. That in itself can help to start to make small changes in habit. Our ability to focus can really help lead to change. And, we have busy lives and we aren't always paying attention, but this concept of mindfulness when we're making contact with an animal, it's something you have to practice. And when you practice it, it becomes part of your kind of observation and unless you're really tired and fall back into your old habits, you'll find that you'll be able to notice smaller details and smaller things before they become really big. We can never change anything about an animal's past. We have to work with what we're seeing in this time and space. And we have to show what the animal is showing us now and work from there. Feldenkrais has some great sayings, and one of them is, meet them where they're at. And so wherever they happen to be, we have to start from there. It doesn't matter where we think they should be, or they did it yesterday, so it should be okay. We have to meet them in the present right now. And the same really with people. If we could do that, our whole lives would be a whole lot better. So there may be subtle differences that change the context, so also be aware of that, because we tend to think things have to be really big. And change can happen in steps, it can happen in a ripple. You may, if you start to pay attention, you may see that there's a little stepping stone and it goes sideways before it goes in a different direction. If things aren't working, do something else. And that's the thing, is one of the things with the whole T-Touch approach is we have so many choices. And you're going to get into that as we look at the options that we have in body work, in the approach that we have to movement and reps and so on. And it gives you so many tools that you can make small changes with. When things aren't going well, stop, refocus, rebalance, get grounded, often exhale. That can make a big difference. Now, having a clear picture in your mind of what you want, that is sometimes it's kind of difficult, because we're better at thinking what we don't want, which will create that picture, the negative picture, rather than thinking about what we would really like to have them do. And that's where people often find that clicker training is so helpful, because you have to have a picture of what you're building towards and how you can chunk it down. And is really helpful for you. Be patient, and be patient with yourself as well, not just with your dog. Notice small changes, and know that changes are cumulative. They don't necessarily happen all at once. I've seen some amazing changes happen, and I've seen other times when it really took a little bit more time, and sometimes a lot more time. And that can depend on so many things, and we don't necessarily know what it is. For me, this whole beauty of possibility, of knowing that I know something will change. I don't know in what order, and I don't know exactly what it will be, but that's what allows me to have patience. I'm not a very patient person. You can ask any one of my family members, but the more tools that you have, the more options you have, the easier it is to be patient. So this Ho'oponopono is a Hawaiian, it's a little Hawaiian tradition, and I really love this. And Linda uses this a lot in terms of helping us to realize that we are all connected in life. Everything in life is connected, and it's a little saying that you can repeat to yourself. It's a little mantra, and it's not only a way of healing ourselves or our relationships with ourselves, but in our other world as well. And of course, we may, if you've been around dogs a long time or animals, you may have done things to animals or people that you regret. And so here's the saying. The mantra is, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. And this can be repeated in different ways. You can start at different places. You can start with, please forgive me. It's just something that you might consider and you might find helpful when you're working in situations where you might have done something that you would do differently today or would do differently at another time. And it's something that can carry on and helps many people.